She went for a jog in her small Iowa town and vanished without a sound. Her phone stopped. Her heart rate flatlined. And 34 days later, a farmhand led police to a cornfield hiding a horrifying secret. But here's the part no one expected. Even after confessing, he claimed he didn't kill her. Welcome back to the Criminal Minds. This is the case of Mollie Tibbetts. And once you hear what really happened, you won't look at evening jogs the same again. Brooklyn, Iowa, wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. It was the kind of town where neighbors waved from across the street, where kids rode their bikes until dark, and where almost every store owner knew your name. With just over 1,400 residents, life here was simple, quiet, and predictable. The kind of town where people didn't lock their doors, and crime was something you watched on TV, not something that came knocking on your own street. People in Brooklyn took pride in their small-town charm. There were family-owned diners where the waitresses knew how you like your eggs. On Friday nights, the high school football stadium came alive with cheers from the stands. And in the summer, the sound of lawn mowers and children's laughter filled the air. It was a good place to grow up and the kind of place where you felt safe. The town itself sat nestled in Poweshiek County, surrounded by farmland and long, winding roads. The nearest big city was Des Moines, more than an hour away. Most residents worked in agriculture, schools, or local businesses. Life moved slowly. That's how people liked it. But everything changed in July of 2018. That summer had been hot. Thick heat clung to the air, and farmers prayed for rain. Kids were home from school, and college students had returned from their campuses, picking up part-time jobs and spending time with family. Among them was 20-year-old Mollie Tibbetts. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't rich. She didn't live a risky lifestyle. She was just a regular college student spending the summer at home with her boyfriend's family. But in just one evening, Mollie's name would be known all across America. Not because of something she did, but because of what was done to her. Her story would shatter the peaceful image of her hometown. Her disappearance would turn friends into suspects, make strangers into heroes, and drag Brooklyn, Iowa, into a spotlight it never asked for. But before the headlines, before the heartbreak, there was just Mollie, a young woman full of life, with a smile that lit up rooms, who went out for a jog and never came back. Mollie Cecilia Tibbetts was a daughter, a sister, a girlfriend, a friend. She was the kind of person people remembered. Not because she tried to stand out, but because she was genuine, warm, and kind. Born on May 8th, 1998, Mollie grew up in the heart of Iowa. Her parents, Laura Calderwood and Rob Tibbetts, divorced when she was young, but both remained active in her life. Mollie split her time between their homes, growing up surrounded by love, encouragement, and a strong sense of family. She was known for her bright smile and loud laugh. Friends described her as funny, thoughtful, and quick-witted. She had this way of making people feel at ease. Even if she just met them, she was never one to judge or gossip. Instead, she listened, really listened, when others talked. Mollie loved reading, writing, and spending time with people she cared about. She was passionate about mental health, education, and helping others. Her dream was to become a child psychologist. After graduating from Brooklyn Guernsey Malcolm High School, she enrolled at the University of Iowa, majoring in psychology. When she wasn't in class, she worked at a daycare, caring for young children. She loved it there. The kids adored her, and the staff saw how natural she was around them. Mollie didn't just show up to work. She made every day special for those kids. That summer in 2018, Mollie decided to stay in Brooklyn and live with her boyfriend Dalton Jack and his brother. She picked up babysitting gigs and took summer classes online. It was a quiet time, a calm in her busy college life. Her relationship with Dalton was strong. They had been dating for over 2 years and talked about the future often. Dalton worked in construction and was out of town during the weekdays, but he and Mollie texted and sent each other Snapchats every day. Mollie had a close circle of friends and a tight bond with her siblings, especially her younger brother, Scott. She kept in touch with people from high school, college, and her job. Her phone was always buzzing. She loved staying connected. And she ran. It was her therapy. Every evening, usually around 7 or 8 p.m., she'd lace up her shoes, pop in her earbuds, and hit the sidewalks or county roads. She wasn't training for a marathon or trying to beat a record. She just loved the feeling of freedom, the quiet time alone with her thoughts. It was during one of those runs, something so normal for her, so routine, that everything went wrong. No one knew it that night. No one expected it. But that jog would be the last time anyone saw Mollie alive. Mollie's evening jogs were part of her summer rhythm. They weren't intense workouts or competitive runs. They were just her time, a way to clear her mind, get some fresh air, and feel grounded after a long day. Brooklyn, Iowa was a safe place to do that. With its narrow roads, open fields, and friendly neighbors, it was a kind of town where seeing someone jog past your house felt ordinary. Mollie often ran through quiet residential streets, sometimes venturing out onto rural roads with a cornfield stretched wide on either side. She usually ran around the same time each night, between 7 and 8 p.m. That Wednesday, July 18, 2018, had been hot and humid. Mollie had spent part of her day inside, doing homework and checking in with friends. She was staying at her boyfriend Dalton's house that week, taking care of his dogs while he was out of town for work. Before a run, Mollie had texted and snapped with Dalton, just like usual. He was in Dubuque, over 130 miles away. Their messages seemed normal, loving and casual, nothing out of the ordinary. Sometime around 7:30 p.m., she left the house for her jog. She wore running shoes, shorts, a pink sports top, and her Fitbit, earbuds in, ponytail swaying. She followed her usual route along Middle Street, then toward the edge of town. People in the neighborhood remembered seeing her. One neighbor saw Mollie running and waved. Another said she was jogging with confidence, like she had done it 100 times before. But after that, she vanished. When Dalton tried messaging her later that night, he got no reply. That wasn't like Mollie. She was the kind of person who always responded, especially to him. He sent another Snapchat. It showed as delivered, but not opened. Still, he didn't panic yet. Maybe she fell asleep early. Maybe she was just tired and hadn't checked her phone. But by the next morning, when she still hadn't responded, concern turned into fear. Dalton texted her, called her, messaged her friends. No one had heard from her. She hadn't shown up for work at the daycare. That's when the phone calls began, to her family, her friends, and eventually the police. By the evening of July 19th, Mollie Tibbetts was officially reported missing in a town like Brooklyn, where missing was something you read about from somewhere else. That word sent a wave of shock and fear. People dropped everything to search. Law enforcement mobilized. And what started as a simple jog quickly became the center of one of the most intense missing persons investigations in Iowa's history. Mollie was gone, and no one knew where, why, or how. The Brooklyn Police Department responded quickly. Officers visited Dalton's house to search for signs of a break-in or foul play. Nothing looked suspicious. Her car was there. Her wallet, ID, and belongings were untouched. Even her phone was missing. The only thing truly absent was Mollie herself. Dalton returned from Dubuque, frantic and confused. He immediately cooperated with investigators, handed over his phone, and walked them through everything he knew. So did his brother and everyone else who had seen Mollie recently. No one had a clue where she could have gone. Soon, the Poweshiek County Sheriff's Office, Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, and the FBI joined the case. That's when the gravity of it all really sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a girl who had taken off. Something had happened. By Friday, July 20th, neighbors, friends, and even strangers gathered in groups, walking through fields, checking ditches, knocking on doors. People brought flashlights, printed flyers, and offered a search late into the night. Still, despite all the effort, the town couldn't shake one terrifying realization. Mollie had gone jogging on a familiar route. She knew those roads. She felt safe there. And now she was just gone. Everyone asked the same question. How could this happen here? But there were no answers. Not yet. Just a growing sense of fear and the beginning of a desperate race against time. The hours after someone disappears are filled with noise. Phone calls, messages, worry, panic, questions. But the scariest part is the silence. The unanswered calls. The texts left undelivered. The ringing that goes nowhere. That's what Mollie's loved ones were facing. Dalton Jack checked his phone constantly. He had sent her a Snapchat the night before, just a normal, sweet message like they always exchanged. It showed as delivered, but it was never opened. That stuck with him, and with investigators too. It meant her phone was still on, at least for a while. Her family tried everything. Her mother, Laura Calderwood, drove around the area, calling out her name. Friends scrolled to their old chats, hoping for some overlooked clue. Everyone had the same feeling in their stomach. This wasn't like Mollie. Something was wrong. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. She didn't take her car. Her wallet and keys were still at Dalton's house. She had no known enemies, no troubling relationships, no reason to run. Police dug into her social media and phone records. They spoke with everyone who had seen or messaged her that day. There was no sudden fight, no cryptic post, no hint she planned to disappear. Just a normal day, and then silence. People started locking their doors in Brooklyn, something that hadn't been necessary before. Parents stopped letting their kids out alone. Women changed their jogging routes. The entire town was holding its breath. And yet, in the middle of all the confusion and fear, the family refused to give up hope. Laura Calder would open her home to investigators and media. She gave interviews with a steady voice, though you could see the pain in her eyes. She begged for answers, not in anger, but in love. She believed Mollie was out there. She believed someone knew something. Dalton, too, became a familiar face in the media coverage. Some online skeptics pointed fingers at him, as often happens in missing persons cases. But police said publicly that Dalton was cooperative and not a suspect. He had been miles away, working, and had passed every test they gave him. As each day passed, the silence grew louder. Where was Mollie? Who had seen her last? And most importantly, why wasn't she coming home? The FBI soon added her to their national missing persons list. Billboards started popping up across Iowa. The reward for information grew to over $300,000, one of the largest in Iowa history. But there was still no sign. Not a shoe, not a phone, not a scream, nothing. Just that run, that evening jog, and then nothing but silence. In the days that followed, Dalton stayed close to Mollie's family. He helped with the search, appeared at press conferences, and made heartfelt pleas to the public. He believed, as they all did, that Mollie was alive, maybe being held somewhere, maybe needing help, and maybe if enough people looked, she could still be found. He held on to that last message, the last image of her smiling, not knowing that would be the final time he ever saw her face, even if just through a screen. The rest of Mollie's family gathered quickly. Her two brothers, Scott and Jake, came back home. Relatives flew in from out of state. Everyone circled around Laura, offering support, helping with press interviews, answering questions from police. They didn't want to believe the worst, and they didn't let anyone else believe it either. From the beginning, the family stood tall, not angry, not panicked, focused. Within 48 hours of Mollie Tibbetts' disappearance, the town of Brooklyn, Iowa transformed. What had once been a quiet, sleepy farming community became the center of a massive search operation, one of the largest in the state's history. Volunteers arrived in waves, not just from nearby towns, but from across Iowa. Many of them didn't know Mollie personally. They came because they couldn't imagine this happening to someone they loved, and they wanted to help. People who had never met before started knocking on doors together, walking shoulder to shoulder through tall fields and thick woods. They looked in drainage ditches, under bridges, in unlocked sheds, abandoned cars, behind buildings. Anywhere someone could hide or be hidden, local farmers opened their land to be searched. Property lines didn't matter anymore. Everyone wanted to help. Meanwhile, the authorities set up a command post. The Poweshiek County Sheriff's Office worked alongside state investigators, the FBI, and even the Department of Homeland Security. They brought in scent tracking dogs, helicopters, heat detection drones, and cell phone data specialists. They interviewed everyone who knew Mollie, family, friends, co-workers, neighbors. They cross-checked alibis, scoured phone records, and collected surveillance footage from gas stations, schools, and homes near her usual jogging route. They also went digital. Agents dug deep into her phone activity, social media, Google history, and her Fitbit account. Anything that might show where she had been, or who she might have been with. The command center received hundreds of tips. Every tip was logged, every possible lead investigated. One tip mentioned a red truck. Another reported seeing someone near the high school at the same time Mollie was out jogging. A few claimed to hear something strange the night she vanished. A scream, a car speeding, dogs barking. Nothing confirmed. Nothing solid. And so, the search widened. Crews began checking nearby towns. Deep River, Guernsey, Montezuma. They searched old barns, fields of corn as tall as men, and dense patches of trees. The community's hope was still strong, but the pressure was growing. With every day that passed, it became harder to believe she was just lost or hiding. There were no ransom calls, no cryptic notes, no credit card activity, just absence. At the local fire station, tables were stacked with maps and missing posters. Volunteers came in, signed up, got briefed, and set out in shifts. People donated food, flashlights, batteries, water bottles, gas cards. Churches opened their doors for prayer. News trucks parked along the curb. The town buzzed with activity. But beneath the surface, there was one question that no one could answer. How could someone disappear into thin air and leave no trace at all? Mollie's face was now everywhere. In the windows of diners, at the town's grocery store, on every telephone pole and gas pump. One photo in particular struck people the hardest. It was a candid picture of her smiling, brown hair falling to the side, eyes bright, the kind of smile you couldn't fake, the kind of face you couldn't forget. Everyone in Brooklyn had seen it, and everyone, young or old, was hoping for the same thing. That tomorrow would be the day Mollie came home. Within days of Mollie Tibbetts' disappearance, the story exploded beyond the small town of Brooklyn, Iowa. What started as a local search for a missing college student quickly caught the attention of the entire nation. But with national attention came pressure and suspicion. The public wanted answers. Some speculated online about possible suspects. Rumors spread fast about boyfriends, co-workers, strangers. The police stayed tight-lipped. They gave regular updates, but shared few details. This is still an active investigation. They repeated again and again. That secrecy frustrated some people, but it was deliberate. The authorities didn't want to tip off whoever might be involved. They didn't want to jeopardize the case. And behind the scenes, they were following a new clue, something captured on a grainy video camera near Mollie's jogging route. They didn't announce it publicly yet, but for the first time in weeks, they had something. Law enforcement interviewed every resident who lived near Mollie's jogging route. They asked about recent visitors, suspicious activity, strangers passing through. They even re-interviewed people they'd already spoken to, just in case a memory had been jogged or a detail had been missed. They reviewed trash pickup schedules, cell tower pings, and traffic logs. They asked to see people's security camera footage, even if it didn't face the street. One single second of video could be the break they needed, and in fact, it was one resident, a little outside town, had a security camera pointed at the end of their driveway. On the night Mollie disappeared, that camera captured a blur, a girl jogging, and behind her, a black Chevy Malibu. The police didn't release this information to the public right away, but quietly, in their command center, everything shifted. They had their first real lead. The footage of the black car wasn't the clearest, but it gave detectives a direction. They zoomed in. They enhanced the image. They noticed something unique. A black Chevy Malibu with non-standard chrome rims and a missing hubcap on the front passenger wheel. Police began checking local vehicle registrations. They searched DMV records, used license plate recognition cameras, and cross-referenced vehicles registered to nearby towns. They also quietly canvassed rural areas and farms. They knew from the footage that the car came from and returned toward the outskirts of town. And finally, after days of checking, a match popped up. A black Chevy Malibu. Same rim, same wheel damage. It belonged to a quiet, 24-year-old farmhand working under the radar, Christian Bahina Rivera. At this point, the police didn't approach him directly. They didn't want to spook him. They wanted to watch him. They began surveillance. They tracked his movements. They checked his work history and spoke to neighbors. They studied his schedule. Then they pulled his car over, casually, routine, and they asked if he'd come down to the station to talk. Rivera agreed. At first, he was calm, cooperative, quiet. Detectives asked about July 18th. Did he remember seeing anything unusual that night? He said no. He claimed he didn't know Mollie Tibbetts. But the officers knew more than they let on. They had video footage. They had Fitbit data. And they had location data from Rivera's own phone, placing him in the exact area Mollie vanished. Bit by bit, they showed him what they had. That's when everything changed. Faced with the evidence, Rivera's calm exterior began to crack. He eventually admitted that he saw Mollie jogging that night. He claimed he found her attractive and began following her in his car. He said he parked the vehicle, got out, and started running alongside her. Mollie told him to leave her alone and threatened to call the police. Rivera said he became angry, and that's when, according to him, he blacked out. The next thing he remembered, he said, was being in his car with Mollie's body in the trunk. He claimed he didn't remember how she died, only that he panicked and drove out to a cornfield, and that's where he left her. Rivera offered to show investigators the exact location. In the early morning hours, officers followed him out to a secluded cornfield, about 15 miles from Brooklyn. It was an area that had already been searched once, but Mollie had been hidden so deeply in the rows of corn, she had been missed. Rivera walked straight to the spot. He pointed, and there, partially covered with corn stalks and leaves, they found Mollie Tibbetts, the girl who had disappeared during her evening jog. The girl whose face had filled posters and television screens across the nation had finally been found. There, hidden beneath broken stalks and pile of leaves, was Mollie's body, decomposed but recognizable. Her clothing matched what she wore during the jog. The autopsy would later confirm she died from multiple sharp force injuries. Who is Christian Bahina Rivera? Christian Bahina Rivera was virtually invisible in the town of Brooklyn, Iowa. He wasn't part of the local social circle. He wasn't someone people whispered about. He wasn't even on the radar of law enforcement. He was just one of many quiet, hard-working men employed in the shadows of rural America. He was born in Mexico and came to the United States as a teenager. He arrived undocumented and eventually found work at Yerby Farms, a large dairy farm outside of Brooklyn. The owner said he presented himself as John Budd, a name tied to false identification documents. Using this alias, he passed background checks and secured steady employment. His duties involved milking cows, cleaning, and other physical labor. He lived in a modest trailer on property owned by the farm, quiet, isolated, and surrounded by fields. Neighbors said he kept to himself. He was polite. He waved when he drove by. Nothing about him raised suspicion. He was a father, too. He had a young daughter with an ex-girlfriend in the area. He paid support, visited occasionally, and appeared to be living a typical life. 1 foot in the shadows, 1 foot in the open. When Rivera's name was released, it shocked the town. Many of his co-workers expressed disbelief. They said he was calm, kept his head down, and didn't cause trouble. He wasn't known for drinking, fighting, or being aggressive. To many, he seemed passive and ordinary, but others would later admit they didn't really know him at all. He didn't socialize much. He rarely left the farm. He didn't attend community events. He blended in and kept his life private. The people who employed him and the neighbors who occasionally saw him described a man who never raised red flags. That made the truth even harder to process. How did he end up in the same place as Mollie? That question would haunt investigators and the public for months. Did he know Mollie? No evidence suggested a prior relationship. Had he seen her before? Possibly. Mollie ran the same route nearly every night. If Rivera had passed her once, he might have noticed her. Did he plan it, or was it an impulsive act? These were questions Rivera wouldn't clearly answer, and as the case progressed, his story would twist and change. After confessing, Rivera didn't cry. He didn't yell. He didn't show much emotion at all. He signed documents. He agreed to another interview. And then, quietly, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. For the detectives, the case had taken a brutal but necessary turn. Mollie was no longer missing. She was no longer a question mark. She was gone, and now the world knew who was responsible. Just days after his confession shocked the nation and led police to Mollie Tibbetts' body, Christian Bahina, Rivera began to change his story. What had seemed like a clean, if tragic, resolution. A man confesses, leads police to the body, and faces justice. Began unraveling court filings, defense interviews, and eventually trial testimony. His version of what happened that night didn't just shift. It became something else entirely. He said he followed Mollie as she jogged. She threatened to call police. He got angry. He blacked out. The next thing he remembered, he was driving with her body in the trunk. When pressed further, he claimed not to recall the killing itself. No knife, no struggle, just a blank space in his memory. Police didn't push too hard in that moment. He had led them to her body. That was enough to charge him with first-degree murder. But the confession wasn't recorded on video, only audio, and it was all in English, not Rivera's native language, Spanish. That fact would become critical later. As the legal proceedings began, Rivera's attorneys started laying the groundwork for doubt. They claimed Rivera was interrogated for hours without proper breaks, food, or legal counsel. They argued that English was not his first language, and that he may not have fully understood the questions or consequences of his answers. More importantly, they began to suggest that someone else may have been involved. At first, this seemed like standard legal defense posturing. But then, 2 years later, during the actual trial, Rivera took the stand and told a version of events that shocked everyone. In court, Rivera testified under oath that he hadn't acted alone. According to him, 2 masked men had entered his trailer that night and forced him at gunpoint to drive them around. He claimed that they were the ones who abducted Mollie, that he watched one of them stab her, put her body in the trunk of his car, and then made him dispose of it under threats to his family. He said he didn't come forward earlier because he feared for the safety of his daughter and ex-girlfriend. To many observers, including prosecutors, this story sounded convenient, incredible, and too little, too late. Why had he mentioned these masked men during his long police interview? Why did he originally say he acted alone? Why did he calmly lead police to Mollie's body with no mention of anyone else? The prosecutors pointed this out harshly during cross-examination. The shift in his story split public opinion. Some viewed it as a desperate attempt to avoid conviction. Others wondered if there could have been more to the story, a shadowy involvement, a cover-up, or even a larger crime ring. But no evidence of other suspects was ever uncovered. No one else's DNA was found on Mollie. No witnesses saw masked men. And no further credible leads ever emerged from Rivera's new claims. Still, the twist raised one big question. Was Rivera lying now, or had he lied back then? Either way, he had placed himself at the scene, admitted to being with Mollie during her final moments, and led police directly to her body. And for the jury, that was what mattered most. With Rivera's confession, the recovery of Mollie's body, the autopsy results, and digital data from multiple devices, the investigators had a solid case. Rivera had been seen in the area in a car that matched surveillance footage, admitted to following Mollie, led police to her body, and now forensics confirmed she had been murdered. The prosecution was ready, and the public wanted justice. Rob Tibbetts, Mollie's father, released a statement the next day. Our hearts are broken. We thank all of you who believed she would come home. Please remember her not by how she died, but by how she lived. Laura, in a separate interview, echoed the same. Mollie loved people. She loved her community, and she deserved better. They weren't just grieving privately. They were leading a town through its darkest moment with grace and strength. As soon as Christian Bahina, Rivera was charged with Mollie Tibbetts' murder, the courtroom became just one of many battlefields. For over 2 years, the legal battle dragged on. COVID-19 created further delays, pushing the trial date to 2021. And all the while, Mollie's family waited quietly, patiently, and with unimaginable strength. As 2021 approached, jury selection was set to begin. The evidence was ready. The courtroom was prepared, and a story that had started on a quiet jog in July 2018 was now heading toward its final verdict. It was May 17, 2021, nearly 3 years after Mollie Tibbetts vanished, when the trial of Christian Bahina Rivera finally began in a small courthouse in Davenport, Iowa. The courtroom was smaller than people expected. The case had captured national headlines, but here in this modest room, it was just wooden benches, soft whispers, and the quiet tapping of reporters' keyboards. Rivera sat at the defense table, wearing a white shirt and black pants. His hair was neatly combed. A Spanish interpreter sat beside him. His face was unreadable. Across the aisle, Mollie's family sat in silence. No outbursts, no tears in public, just quiet, painful presence, there to represent Mollie, to hear every word, and to see the process through to the end. The state didn't waste time. They told the jury this case wasn't about politics or immigration. It was about Mollie Tibbetts. They laid out a clear, linear case. Mollie went for a jog on July 18, 2018. Rivera followed her in his black Chevy Malibu. Surveillance footage placed him on the same street at the same time. His phone data matched her location. He confessed to following, confronting, and later hiding her body. And finally, he led police to her grave. This wasn't a mystery. They said this was murder. Rivera's lawyers took a completely different route. They admitted, yes, he was there. Yes, he led police to body. But they argued he didn't kill Mollie. Their claim? Rivera had been threatened by 2 masked men who entered his home, forced him to drive him around, abduct Mollie, and then dispose of her body. They said Rivera had lied in his original confession because he was scared for his daughter's life. It was a bold strategy, and one that hadn't been mentioned publicly until now. The jury was listening, but many eyes in the courtroom, including Mollie's family, remained frozen in disbelief. Over the next several days, the prosecution brought forward investigators who detailed the timeline, the video footage, and the data tracking Rivera's movements. Forensic experts who confirmed Mollie's blood was found in the trunk of Rivera's car. Medical examiners who describe her injuries in painful detail. Multiple stab wounds to the chest. Crime scene analysts who walked the jury through the cornfield, the recovery, and how well her body had been hidden. Each witness added a layer. Each piece of evidence drew the net tighter around Rivera. And then, in a dramatic twist, Rivera himself took the stand. In calm Spanish, Rivera told the jury his version of what happened. He claimed 2 masked men, one armed, showed up at his trailer the night Mollie disappeared. He said they ordered him, in broken English, to drive his car and follow a girl. He claimed they abducted Mollie, stabbed her, and forced him to dispose of her body under threat that if he didn't comply, they would harm his daughter. He said he kept it quiet all these years because he was afraid. The courtroom was tense. Some jurors leaned forward. Others scribbled notes. But prosecutors hit back, hard. Why didn't he mention this before? Why did he calmly confess to the murder and lead police to body? Why was there no trace of these alleged men? Rivera had no answers, only his story. After 2 weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, expert witnesses, and Christian Bahina, Rivera's surprising claims on the stand, the trial finally came to an end. The courtroom was tense as the jury left to deliberate. 12 men and women carried the weight of Mollie Tibbetts' life, and the fate of the man accused of taking it on their shoulders. Their job was not to feel. Their job was to decide, beyond a reasonable doubt, was he guilty of murder? After deliberating for hours, it all came down to what they believed. And at 2:15 p.m. on May 28, 2021, the jury sent word. They had reached a verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Christian Bahina Rivera, guilty of first-degree murder. There was no outburst, no gasps, no cheers, just a wave of relief, quiet, solemn, and heavy. Rivera showed no emotion. He blinked. He looked at the table. Mollie's family remained composed. Her father closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. Her mother held her son's hand. They didn't cry. They didn't collapse. They had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. Under Iowa law, A conviction of first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. No debate, no negotiation. Rivera would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Even after the guilty verdict, the sentencing, one question lingers in the minds of many, not just casual observers, but even seasoned investigators, journalists, and locals from Brooklyn, Iowa. What really happened to Mollie Tibbetts on the night of July 18th, 2018? Because while the evidence overwhelmingly points to Christian Bahena Rivera as the killer, parts of the story, especially Rivera's own, still leave gaps, doubts, and disturbing possibilities. She didn't just vanish. She left a light behind. And it's our job to carry it forward. A daughter, a friend, a symbol of light, and a jogger whose final run changed far more than she ever could have imagined. If the story moved you, if it made you pause and think, share it. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We tell the stories that must be told, the voices that never got to speak again. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and stay human.